Hi, welcome to the recap room. In today's video, we'll be talking about an adventure, drama, and family film entitled Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Warning, spoilers ahead. The movie is set in Florida. While working on a grocery store, a teenager reflects on his life, thinking that nothing he does matters. He then sees his classmate Amy and introduces himself as Jake. But she didn't care, and instead, she goofed around with her friends. He then receives a call that he says will change everything. Shelly, his co-worker, gives him a ride. Apparently, Jake needs to go and deal with his grandpa since his dad couldn't get out of work. Jake calls his grandpa Abe to check on him, but he seems to be worried because the key to his gun cabinet is missing. Jake asks if he took his pills that day and reveals that his father took his gun. His grandpa then expresses his worry to fight without a gun and hangs up. Jake reveals that his grandpa has dementia, that's why he's unstable. They're finally near his house, but a strange man appears out of nowhere. It was already nighttime when Jake arrives at his grandpa's house. He looks for him, but he seems to be missing. Jake then calls Shelly and says someone broke in. Jake notices something odd behind his grandpa's house, and so he checks it out. He picks up a flashlight that seems to have blood on its handle and uses it to look for his grandpa in the dark. After a while, he then sees Abe on the ground with a bloody fork in his hand. He was shocked to see that both his eyeballs are missing. Jake calls 911 and asks for paramedics. Suddenly, Abe grabs his hand and asks him to go to the island and find Emerson. He mentions the postcard and asks him to go the loop to September 3rd, 1943. But it didn't make any sense to Jake. Abe tells him that he might seem crazy, but he says the bird will explain everything. He calls Jake Tigriscu and makes him promise to do it. Abe then regrets not telling him something years ago. Suddenly, he stops talking and takes his last breath. Jake asks what he needs to know, but it's too late. Jake hears some footsteps and sees a huge monster. Luckily, Shelly appears and Jake warns her something is behind her, and she shoots it. The scene then transitions to a clinic where Jake is in therapy. Dr. Golan reveals that it has been a month since Abe died, and she observes that he's doing well so far. She adds that in traumatic situations, it's not uncommon to see things that aren't there. His visions might be a product of the stories he heard from his grandpa when he was younger. When asked if they were close, the scene then transitions to the past. His grandfather used to babysit him a lot, and he would tell him stories about where and how he escaped some monsters. During bedtime, Abe would tell him a story about him living in a lovely children's home on a little island near Wales. He shows him a picture and says that the headmistress there is the clever Mrs. Peregrine. It was a home for special children like Bronwyn and Victor, who he described as strong as 10 men, Hugh, who has been living inside him, and Emma, who could float. Abe adds that Emma had to wear special shoes made of lead to keep her from floating in the air. He believes that she's still on the island. Abe reveals he was sent there because there were huge monsters where they lived. We then see Jake sharing this story with his classmates during middle school class, but they just laugh at him. So Jake returns the pictures to his grandpa and accuses him of lying to him about the home and the monsters. He adds that even his dad says they were not true. Back to the present, Jake and his dad are checking his grandpa's things. He then asks his dad why he seems to be okay even after the death of Abe. But his dad reveals that they were not that close. He was a wonderful grandpa, but not such a great dad. When they returned home, there was a surprise birthday party for Jake. Later, his Aunt Susie hands him a gift from his grandpa. He opens it, and it was a book with a dedication to Jake. He finds a postcard sent to Abe from Mrs. Peregrine just 2 years ago, and Jake shows it to his therapist during his next session. Dr. Golan then says that having an opportunity to see the children's home in Wales and separate fantasy from reality may be helpful to Jake. And so, the next day, Jake and his dad travel to Wales. On their way, his father spots a peregrine falcon in the air. Jake then jokingly said it's probably Mrs. Peregrine. They finally arrive in the town and check in at their hotel. His dad then asks some kids outside to bring his son to the other side of the island while he goes to the beach and goes bird watching. Worm and McDurdy accompany him and show him the way to the children's home. But when he arrives, he's disappointed to see that it's fully destroyed. When he goes back to the hotel, a man reveals that a bomb fell right on the roof of the children's home, during a German air raid on September 3, 1943, and there's not one survivor left. The next day, Jake visits the children's home again, but this time, he goes inside and looks around. Suddenly, a girl appears in front of him, calling him Abe. Jake gets startled and runs, but he falls down and goes unconscious. He wakes up and finds himself carried by a little girl. She's Bronwyn, the strong girl from his grandpa's story. He then finds the others and recognizes them. Jake is then confused about whether he's already dead or not. Emma then reveals that Mrs. Peregrine saw him on the ferry, and so they were sent to get him and bring him to the loop. They led him into a cave, but he runs back to his hotel. He was about to go to his room when a man asks him where he was going. Jake shows him his key and says he's a guest there. They thought he was a spy, and so they planned to interrogate him. But suddenly, he was rescued by the children. Apparently, they traveled back in time when they entered the cave. On their way back to the children's home, Jake can't believe that they are actually real. They reveal that it's September 3rd, 1943, all day, every day. It's what they call the loop. They finally arrive at the children's home where Mrs. Peregrine is waiting. The headmistress reveals that he was just a kid the last time Abe sent her a photo. She then invites him for tea. Inside, Olive uses her hands to boil the tea in the kettle. When they went outside, Jake tells Mrs. Peregrine that before his grandpa died, he asked him to find her. She reveals that some people are peculiar. It's because of a recessive gene carried down through families. Yet many generations can pass without a peculiar child being born. Peculiars have been persecuted through the ages, and so the children's home was established. Mrs. Peregrine says she's an Embrine, a type of peculiar that can manipulate time. They choose a safe place, a safe day, and create a loop that preserves the last 24 hours. Embrines are the ones charged with the care of the young. She then shows him around and introduces the children there. Horace approaches them and introduces himself to Jake. Jake asks about Bronwyn's brother, and Mrs. Peregrine says Victor's upstairs. She then asks Emma where Olive and Enoch are, but their conversation is interrupted when Fiona tells Mrs. Peregrine that someone is at the door. Emma asks Jake for a favor and hands him a rope. She explains that one of her daily chores is to put the baby squirrel back in the tree. She asks him to tie the rope around her waist, and then she removes her shoes so she could float. After putting the squirrel back, Jake pulls her down. She reveals that it was Abe's job before. Emma then invites him to join them for dinner and says he can borrow Abe's clothes in the attic. Upstairs, Olive calls Jake and introduces him to Enoch. He then tells Jake not to even bother thinking of staying just because he likes Emma. Enoch reveals Emma swore off romance decades ago when she got her heart broken. He then shows him his work. Enoch can make inanimate objects or even dead people come to life as his puppets. In the attic, Emma says that Abe was visiting other loops when he was traveling. He asks why, but she says that she can't answer. Finally, it's time for dinner. Fiona tells Jake it must be strange for him to visit another century and meet his grandfather's friends. Olive then asks about the future, but Mrs. Peregrine stops her and says they do not discuss that there. The children then ask if Jake wants to stay there forever, but Enoch says he's got no reason to. He'll surely leave just like his grandfather did. Emma is disappointed because of it and walks out. It is then revealed that Abe left to join the army. Suddenly the telephone rings. Mrs. Peregrine asks them to prepare for movie time while she answers the call. It was Abe asking how is everyone. They then gather around the fireplace while Horace projects his dreams. Emma reveals that Horace dreams about clothes mostly, but some of his dreams are prophetic. They then see another Embrine who seems to be in danger. After that, a scene where Jake and Emma are about to kiss is shown, but Mrs. Peregrine stops it. After watching, all of them go outside to watch the headmistress reset time. They all equip with gas masks and wait till a missile is dropped on the house. Mrs. Peregrine pauses it and resets the time back to September 3rd again. As Jake puts back Abe's clothes, he sees a letter from Abe addressed to Miss Peregrine. Jake takes it with him and leaves with Emma, who showed him the way out. At the cave, a sound from Jake's phone is then heard. Emma is curious about the cell phone, and so Jake shows him how to use it. They then talk about the possibility of peculiars living in the present if they wanted to, but Emma reveals they can't. Suddenly, an Embrine bird lands inside the cave. Emma takes it and says it must be the one from Horace's dream. Emma then decides to bring it with her since the bird is injured, and Jake goes back to his dad. His dad asks where he's been, and Jake says he hung out with Worm and Dirty D. However, while they were walking, a shepherd stops them and asks Jake if he's responsible for killing his sheep. Jake's dad then says his son and his friends have been together all day, but Worm and Dirty D say they haven't seen him since yesterday. Because of it, his father was so disappointed and says from then on they have to stick together. Inside the hotel room, Jake takes out the letter he took from the children's home and reads it. There, Abe warns Mrs. Peregrine that some of Mr. Barron's group are in England. Abe asks her to warn Mrs. Avocet, who he knows has a loop there. He mentions she should make a new one right away. The letter is dated January 2016. The next day, Jake and his dad go to the beach to watch birds. They met another bird spotter named John Lemon there. However, Franklin, Jake's dad, is intimidated by him, and so they go back to the hotel. Jake waits for his dad to fall asleep and escapes through the window to go back to the loop. He then finds Mrs. Peregrine, who is busy caring for the inbreed named Miss Avocet. Jake mentions he knows about her because of the letter and asks who Mr. Barron is. In addition, Jake reveals his grandpa died an unnatural death. Because of this, Miss Peregrine is obviously disappointed and walks out. Olive and Enoch overhear their conversation, but they aren't allowed to say anything. Knowing that Jake is looking for some answers, he takes him to Victor, Bronwyn's brother. Jake is shocked to know that Victor is already dead, and so Enoch places a heart in his body and controls him. Later, the group goes for the daily walk. Jake asks Emma who killed Victor, but she refuses to answer. But when he reveals that he has seen a man with white eyes the night his grandpa died, she then brings him into the water and into her secret hideout. She makes the room water-free by using her ability to manipulate air. Before Abe left, she reveals that he gave her a box and asks her to keep it safe. He finds an envelope inside containing his grandpa's old map, which shows where the loops are. There are also photos of some members of Barron's group, who Emma describes as bad peculiars. Jake sees the man who visited his grandpa, and Emma reveals that he's the leader, Barron. Emma says Abe dedicated his life to hunting these people, and those in the picture are the ones he never found. Abe was hunting them because this group raided loops and kills the peculiar children in there. In addition, she reveals Abe only retired when Jake was born. Apparently, Jake is also peculiar. She then takes him back to the house to watch Mrs. Peregrine kill the monster. Emma says the monster is invisible. Only Abe and Jake can see them, and that's their gift. Mrs. Peregrine tells Jake that the monsters are called Hologast, or Hollows for short. They were once regular peculiars, but they got tired of living in loops. Barron believes that by harnessing the essence of an inbreed's power, he and his cronies could gain immortality and be able to live outside loops. Barron devised an experiment and kidnapped an inbreed to use for it, but as a result, they all turn into hollows or invisible monsters. Years later, Barron discovered that by consuming the eyes of other peculiars, especially children, he began to change and regain his human form. He then tells his group about it, and they all feasted on Peculiar's eyes. They are then interrupted when Olive comes to tell them that Miss Avocet is finally awake. The bird Emma found in the cave. Miss Avocet shares that the Hollows have found their new loop, and all her children were killed. She reveals that they set up the machine again to do the experiment. This time, he's planning to use more imprints. Jake asks if the Hollows only attack Peculiars, and Miss Peregrine replies they'll slaughter anything in their path. He then thinks they're already there because of the sheep that they were killed on the island. Fearing for the children's safety, Miss Peregrine asks them to pack their things so they can leave tomorrow. Emma wants Jake to come with them, but he says he can't just leave his family like that. In addition, he can't find like his grandpa and he can't kill anybody. And so, Jake returns to the island. His father is relieved to see him because there's a dead body with no eyes found. Seeing this, Jake decides to run and warn Miss Peregrine. His father follows him, but he can't keep up with him. John then volunteers and says he'll find Jake for him. He follows Jake into the cave. There, Jake finds out that John isn't really who he is. He's disguising himself as other people just to follow him. He even disguised as his therapist, Dr. Golan, to make Jake come to the island to find the location of the loop. Apparently, It's Mr. Barron himself. He then threatens Jake to take him to the children's home. As they were all busy packing, Mr. Barron then arrives with Jake. Left with no choice, Mrs. Peregrine offers to go with Barron if he leaves the children out of it. Miss Peregrine asked Barron to let go of Jake, and then he made him promise to look after the children. She then transformed into a bird and goes inside the cage. Knowing that the Hollows are coming to get them, Jake and Miss Avocet ask the children to get weapons and seal all doors and windows up tight. It's time for Abe's call again, and this time Jake answers it. He then tells him he misses him and says sorry if he disappointed him. He calls him the best grandpa in the world and then hangs up the phone. Mrs. Avocet orients the children on what to do when suddenly an invisible hollow pulls her. It then takes Enoch, but just as the monster was about to take his eyes, Jake shoots it. The children then run to the attic. Realizing that it's almost reset, Jake suggests that they escape through the window and asks Fiona to do something with the tree. Luckily, they were all out when the missile drops on the house. The loop closes since Miss Peregrine is not there to reset the day. They then plan to go to Blackpool to rescue Miss Peregrine. And since it's miles away, Jake suggests that they use the sunken ship. They all work together to restore it and use Abe's old map to help them find their way to Blackpool. After a while, they finally arrive. Emma, Jake and Millard go out of the ship and walk to a carnival. They then move inside the Blackpool Tower and find Baron, his friends and some Hollows. Jake uses Emma to provoke Baron into sending some of his men and the Hollows to the pier to kill the children. True enough, they took the bait and followed Emma and Jake. One of Baron's friends was hit by a train while the others continued to pursue them to the carnival. The children then proceed with their plan to defeat them. Enoch makes an army out of the corpses inside the ship, while the others throw snow and candies to make the invisible monsters visible. Enoch's puppet skeletons fight the Hollows and end up killing the other men from the Baron's group. They then proceed to step 2 and make their way to Baron and his friends. By using their unique abilities, they were able to hold the two, except Baron, who is obviously too powerful for them. Jake tries to shoot him, but his aim is so bad. Emma tries to hold Baron using her breath so Jake could get the imprints. However, she runs out of breath. While Baron is trying to open the door, Jake successfully unlocks the cage of the imprints. He lets them escape to make new loops for their children, but Jake is left alone with Baron. Emma and Enoch come inside, but they are confused since Baron changed into Jake's form. Both of them try to prove that they are the real Jake. Suddenly, a monster enters the room. The real Jake sees it and tells the two, while Baron has no idea that the monster is already behind him. Thinking it was Jake, the Hollow attacks him and gets his eyes out. Being the only one who can see the monster, Jake shoots the Hollow and kills it. Fortunately, all of them are safe. Before the loop closes, the children say goodbye to Jake one by one. They are all headed to the year 1943 while Jake stays in 2016. He goes and travels back to his home in Florida and finds his grandfather still alive. Abe hands him the book filled with different currencies. He convinces him to go back to 1943 to find Emma. Jake travels to different loops all over the world just to find a way to 1943 where Emma and the others are waiting. He tells her everything he went through just to get there, and then Emma kisses him. The movie ends by showing Miss Peregrine as a bird flying over the ship still looking after the kids. And that is the end of the movie. For more movie recaps like this, make sure to like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell as well so that you are notified on our next uploads. Thank you for watching.